Okay, in this video we're going to give you an introduction to the curve editor of Max.
That's right, the tool with which you will control all of your animation curves.
This is very important stuff.
Yeah.
Let's open it up. Let's show them what we're talking about. We're going to go up here, in case your toolbar isn't slid over, which yours probably won't be, but just in case it is, you can slide it over. This is the Open the Curve Editor icon. Just go and give that a tap.
Click, booyah.
And you've got the Curve Editor open. There it is in all its glory.
Now, you guys have actually seen this window a couple of times now, but we haven't really talked about what makes the window up, some of the things you're going to see in the interface, and that's what we're going to get out of the way now. Now, I do want to mention ahead of time, this is not a video in which we're going to be talking about animation curves. That's coming up a little bit later.
Right.
All we want to do right now is just kind of talk to you about this window in general, give you an idea of some of the things you're going to find when you open it and when you're looking at it.
Right, we just want to get you familiar with the interface. And speaking of the interface, let's have a look at it. Over here on this left window, this is called the controller window.
Yeah.
This is kind of like a list of all of the controllers in your scene.
That's right, and we're going to talk about controllers coming up very, very shortly.
Sure. So just keep that in mind. This is kind of like all the objects in your scene, kind of starting with world. It's kind of arranged in a hierarchical view. You have different
hierarchical view. Isn't that hard to say?
Yeah, actually, I looked it up. You can say it in two different ways, but we won't harp on that right now.
Ooh.
Yes. You have all the objects in your scene.
I heard an edge in his voice. Did anybody else hear that?
You have, the floor, the talented ball, and then the hierarchy kind of drops down even further.
Sure.
You have our transforms. Position, scale, rotation.
Yep.
You have different parameters associated with the object of, the ball itself, which is a sphere. So this is kind of like if you picture, in Microsoft Windows, the Explorer window, you'll have folders on one side, and then you kind of have like the contents of the folder on this side.
I gotcha.
And it's kind of like the same thing here.
I never used the Explorer window, though, so that whole analogy was pretty much lost on me.
Right, but some of you, more familiar with Windows, maybe...
exactly. Some of the people who
may
are more
ring
along
home like
the
me.
IT snob
Yeah,
line.
exactly.
Now, at the same time, I do want to mention this. Right now, all we're going to be focusing on here inside the controller window are the various transforms for a given animated object.
Right.
Now, in this particular case, you'll notice we have the talented ball, which is opened up because we've animated it. Underneath, we have transform. Now, underneath transform, what do you have? Position, rotation, scale.
Yep.
In this case, we have X, Y, and Z position. Why? Because those three things have been animated, as we did in the last video.
That's right.
We actually animated the position in all three axes. We did not animate rotation.
Right.
And this brings up another interesting point. If you select an object, or a controller in this case, that has not been animated, take a look at this window real quick, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Notice you really don't get anything.
Right, it's pretty much empty.
And then as soon as we click over here, you start getting all sorts of information. So we're going to be talking more about what you find over here in just a few minutes. I just kind of wanted to get that out. If you are totally unfamiliar with controllers and what they are, don't worry. We're going to talk about controllers here in just a couple of videos.
Right.
For now, all you need to know is that this is a list of all of the controllers in your scene, be they animated or not animated, and you're going to be cycling through these.
And just to give you a quick refresh, a controller, again, is basically sort of like a little black box that contains your animation information.
That's right. It's going to handle some aspect of animation.
Right.
All right, so let's move on.
So another thing that I want to bring up here, notice that when we opened up our curve editor, we had curves in it by default.
Yes, we did.
Why is that? It's because our ball was selected when we opened up our curve editor.
Very cool.
So sort of like here, you could see all three position. I'm going to actually hold down Control, and then you can add to your selections. So X is selected, hold down Control, click Y, click Z. Oop, my mistake. Click Y, click Z.
Click Z.
Yes, and now you can see all three curves up here.
Exactly.
But now if you deselect your ball in the viewport, watch what happens. Everything disappears.
Gotcha.
Because by default, the curve editor is set up to automatically scroll down and display the relevant curve information on your object.
That can be very handy. Is there a way to stop that?
There sure is. You can actually go up to here to this settings menu, and you could turn off auto expand, which again expands the list on this side, and you could turn off auto select as well.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so there are different ways. I kind of like to leave it on.
Sure.
Actually, since let's move on. Let's talk about the menu items.
Yeah, let's go ahead and kind of talk about the various aspects of the interface. We already kind of mentioned the controller pane.
Right.
And actually, before we go up to the menu bar, let's take just a second. We'll move directly across to the big guy that kind of dominates the whole interface.
And that would be your key window.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, this is where you will actually see all of your animation curves. You'll notice that, as we mentioned earlier, it is organized very much like the graph that we drew out on the whiteboard, where we have time across the bottom and we have value running up the left side.
Right. which is very cool. And not only can you see your keys, your keys that you actually laid down.
That's right.
You could see the interpolation behavior between the keys.
Right, that curve that 3ds Max created to provide you with animation in between your recordings, your keyframes.
Right, and that's sort of like what the heart of the curve editor is all about, is understanding this behavior.
That's right.
And then later on in the animation curves lecture,
right.
we're going to explain how you can change this behavior.
Mm-hmm. And how you can control these curves and thereby control the nature of your animation, give you true power over how animation's working without having to add any more keyframes.
Sure.
All right, so real quickly, before we move away from this window, let's talk about navigating it.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to move around this window. You're going to find as your animation gets larger and larger and you end up animating longer scenes, that this window will require you to, kind of move around. So let's talk about how you can do that.
Sure. Well, there are actually a couple ways, like in Max, a couple ways to do everything.
Sure.
If you want to pan around this thing, like let's say, I want to see, a little bit further, I want to zoom in on a certain aspect of it, there are certain ways you could do it. You can use these scroll bars up here and down here as well, or you can actually click and hold the middle mouse button and it turns into a grabby hand, and now you're actually panning around just like you would in a viewport.
Very nice.
Same exact control, which is pretty cool. So that's panning right there. Now let's talk about zooming.
Okay.
Now if you want to zoom in to a certain set of keys, again, a couple different ways of doing it. You could actually use the zoom tool down here, and you could sort of uniformly zoom in and out.
Okay.
You can use this zoom marquee tool and just, do a marquee select over a certain area, let go, and it just kind of snaps to that area.
Very nice.
And then there are actually some key commands to do that as well. I'm actually going to go back to here. I know we haven't talked about this yet. This is sort of like the default select command, if you will. That's kind of how it was when you opened it.
Right, it's just kind of a way to break out of that zoom tool so you're not still zooming.
Exactly, because I actually want to show you, this is handy for selecting keys and things like that.
Sure.
So let's say you want to be able to zoom without having to go down and click here on these tools. Let's say you want to stay in this select tool, if you will. The way to do that is using some key commands. You actually hold down Control and Alt, and then you click and drag with the middle mouse button, and now you will uniformly zoom in and out just like before.
That's right. Now, he said something really interesting there that you haven't quite heard yet if you've just been navigating in viewports. He said uniformly zoom.
Right.
Now,
basically, I'm zooming in both my X dimension and my Y dimension at the same rate.
That's right, and this is something that can get very confusing to people who are totally new to the graph editor, but it boils down to this. What if you need to see more time in this graph, but you don't necessarily need to see more value?
Right. Let's say we want to shrink it in this timeline here while keeping the value line the same.
That's right. Or vice versa. Maybe you need to see more value, but you don't want to change the amount of time that you're looking at.
Right, exactly.
This is where non-uniform zoom comes in, and this is just absolutely essential. You need to know about this and how to do it.
And the easiest way to do that is go down here to this zoom button, which is actually a flyout. And now you can actually see zooming in time, left and right. Right, or zooming in value, which is vertical.
Go ahead and show them zooming in time.
So now when I'm zooming, I'm actually clicking the left mouse button and dragging left and right.
That's right.
And you can see how you're actually adjusting how much time you're seeing at any given point.
That's right. Watch that timeline across the bottom of the graph. You can see that expanding as he zooms in and shrinking in as he zooms away.
It's kind of handy. It actually adjusts the numerical values for you.
That's right. But at the same time, take a look at the value along the left-hand side of the graph. Notice that is not changing.
Right.
So you're staring at the same value. Now, why is this so handy? Well, if you need to focus in on a certain aspect of the timeline that is only animated between, let's say, a value of 1 and 10.
Yep.
If you were to uniformly zoom in on that, the whole thing would get bigger, but you might lose some of the aspect of your curve.
Right, exactly. So now let's go ahead and do a non-uniform zoom in value.
Cool.
Go ahead and select it, and then I'm going to click the left mouse button.
Button.
Yes, we're not
mutton.
hunting for mutton around here.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just dragging up and down. And now time stays the same, and now we can adjust our value. And again, I'm using the middle mouse button to pan.
That's right.
So you can kind of like zoom, pan, very handy.
Yeah, and this is like especially handy. Like, let's say we wanted to really focus in on our Translate Z, which is giving us our bounce. We can use this and sort of accentuate that bounce. by scaling up. So now we get a really good idea of exactly how high we go, the true shape of the curve, where if we were zoomed out greatly in value...
It's almost like the curve flattens out completely.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still have the exact same amount of animation. Nothing has changed, but we're so far away now that we wouldn't be able to see anything. And why would this be handy? Maybe there would be another value that we animated that goes between, let's say, negative 1,000 and 1,000, where that curve would take up this entire graph.
Right.
But when we go to check out our z-translate for the ball, we need to zoom way in, just in value, to make everything line up properly. So definitely get used to doing this.
Now, there's also a very easy way. Let's say this, this is kind of flattened out again. Let's say you want to tell Max to quickly snap so that the top range and the bottom range of these values come into view and zoom automatically.
For your selected curves.
Right, exactly. For your selected curves. You can use this thing down here called Zoom Value Extents.
Okay.
Kind of has like a bracket on top and bottom. You go and click that, and now it just kind of brings everything into view almost like the way it was by default.
Very nice. Now, I do notice that is a flyout, so what are we going to find inside there?
Well, you also have another setting here, which basically, if you want to specify a range for zooming your value.
Yeah, this is going to be for viewing the curve editor in another format, which we'll talk about just a little bit later.
Sure.
And so don't worry about that right now. I just wanted to mention that is a flyout. This is going to be more for working with ranges, and the dope sheet has very little to do with our curves right now. But in case you guys see, like, what does that do?
Yeah.
Now you know.
So now I actually want to go back to, my kind of default tool, which is the, the Move Keys tool. You can actually click it up here, or you can use the M key as a shortcut.
Cool.
So now, I'm back to here. I can marquee select. I could select keys. I can look at them and everything. Very cool.
Now, there is a hotkey for doing this non-uniform zooming.
Right, exactly. And that's actually what I wanted to point out. You read my mind.
Yes, I did.
Wow. Clairvoyant. So now, instead of having to go down here and select our flyouts and everything, select our tool, we don't have to do that. There's actually a key command. You're actually going to hit 4 buttons at once, so bear with us. Again, it uses the middle mouse button, but you can also hit Alt, Control, and Shift.
It's like hitting a key on a keyboard.
Right, exactly.
And a middle mouse drag out to, I believe, the right.
Right. Actually, you actually want to move, drag up and down because you actually need to sort of lock this into the non-uniform mode.
And this is really interesting, too, because the thing's actually going to behave in 2 methods like this. Check this out. If I hold down Control, Alt, and Shift, and I drag to the right, notice I get uniform scaling.
Right.
It's nice and smooth, but I am going
But you're still doing uniform. Yeah.
But if I hold down the same keys, Control, Alt, Shift, and I middle mouse drag downward, we switch over to non-uniform mode.
That's right.
Now, just me personally, I typically use this method because I almost never come down and click on navigation tools.
Exactly.
It's just a habit, but either way that you work is absolutely fine. It's just whatever you get used to.
Yeah, I like this way too because it allows you to stay in your default move keys mode up here while still being able to, again, Alt, Control, Shift, middle mouse button, and then start to drag up or down without having to go back and select the zoom tool down there. And when you let go, you're back in move keys mode.
That's right. Now, it is a lot of keys to hold down, given, because, 3 keys on the keyboard
but,
and then a button
you guys
on
are
the mouse.
taking notes, right? Write it down.
You're taking notes, write it down.
Stop the video and do a little practicing.
But also, something else that I do like to mention, especially to people who haven't been doing 3D very long, you should always have one hand floating near the keyboard.
Oh, yeah.
In most cases, near the left-hand side of the keyboard, ready to tack hotkeys.
Right.
Every now and then I'm walking around classrooms and I see students, using 3ds Max, and they've got their hand propping up their chin, and
which
they're just
Zach
using
is
their
actually
mouse.
doing right now.
And I will always walk over, and hopefully they won't see me. I'm going to just kind of knock their little prop chin out and hopefully let their head smack into the desk, because you cannot use any 3D application tool efficiently with just one hand.
Absolutely.
And there are some people who will try to argue that, and they will inevitably be wrong, because at some point you're going to need to hold down a hotkey.
Exactly.
Always have that hand floating over there on your keyboard, ready to hit the keys you need to do the proper navigation. It'll just speed you up.
And even when you're looking around in your viewports, you always want to be, tilting and rotating and panning in your perspective mode. You don't want to keep looking at the same 2D image on your screen. And to do that, you need the Alt key handy.
That's right. Now, real quick, let's just do a quick review of the buttons down there in the navigation area, just so we've seen them all.
Sure thing. This is your pan tool.
Right. Now, this just basically takes the left mouse button and makes it do what the middle mouse button already does for you.
Exactly. I'll hit M to go back to select mode, and then middle mouse button, drag, and again, you're panning. So now we already explained the tool for snapping your values. This is the tool for snapping time.
That's right.
Yeah.
So zoom horizontal.
So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and do my little non-uniform zoom hotkey.
Right.
Just zooming in time, and then zoom horizontal extents, boom, snaps you back in.
And then you can click on zoom value extents like as well, and that would actually put the whole thing nicely squared up inside your view.
Exactly.
So there you go. Then, of course, you have the zoom tool here.
Yep. Uniform zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we explain you could do the non-uniform zoom.
Right. Now, if you're more comfortable, of course, just using one direction as opposed to the other, feel free to come down here and use your tools for zooming only in value or zooming only in time.
Right.
I'm more of a hotkey guy. It's just habit. I'm not saying that one way is better or worse than the other. It's whatever you get used to. It's perfectly fine.
Exactly. And then we have the zoom marquee select option here, which is actually called zoom region, but I like the whole marquee select idea. I'm zooming in.
Absolutely.
I'm zooming in.
So from here, and then there you go, just use your snaps to go right back to normal. So from here, we've handled the two biggest and most prominent aspects of this window. We talked about the controller window, we talked about the key window, a key view.
Right.
And from here, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the rest of the interface. Now, before we actually start doing that, I do want to mention we're not going to be going over every single command and every single part of each menu.
Right.
We'll give you an idea of what you're going to find under each menu. We're also not going to be going over every single button along the toolbar, because doing that would require that we break into a lecture about animation curves.
Right, and that is coming up.
Yeah, we'll save that for a future video. So let's go ahead and have a look. Let's start up in the menu bar.
Sure thing. Actually, why don't we talk about the toolbar here first?
Okay.
Yeah, just because the toolbar is visible, and actually we are going to duplicate some commands up here. You guys will see that later.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is actually here. This allows you to filter out what you want to display in your controller window.
Actually, real quick, let me throw this out. In general, if you just need a real quick general idea of what the toolbar is, this is where you're going to find some of the most frequent commands that you will use when working with the curve editor.
Sure.
And they're here in icon format so that you can quickly nail them, just like any toolbar.
Exactly.
In the Max main UI, just about in any application.
Yep, this is sort of like the tool belt of the curve editor.
Exactly. It's your utility belt if you were Batman.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first icon does
First
what?
icon, this allows you to filter out, what you want to see or not see here in your controller window.
Very nice.
That could be handy if you just kind of want to limit information.
Yes,
and here is the Move Keys tool, which I have kept going to many times before. This allows you to select keys, and then you can move them around if you want to.
Yeah, we'll talk more about exactly what effect that will have just a little bit later. So let's go ahead and undo that.
No problem. And actually, in order to undo that, as a refresher for a quick undo, before letting go of my left mouse button, I hit my right mouse button.
Right.
Boom.
That's why it's very handy to have two fingers ready on your mouse.
And over here is the slide keys mode as well, and this allows you to sort of take keys and just kind of slide them back and forth.
Yeah, well, again, that's a tool that we'll talk more about a little bit later. We're not going to go over every single button here, but let's go ahead and go on to the next one where we can.
We use this for scaling keys, and so again, you can take some keys here. And you can kind of scale them relative to each other and relative to this pivot here as well.
Nice.
So let's say we want to only look at our our Z position, our bounce. There it is. And let's say we want to scale it, basically starting at the center and then scaling out here and scaling out here. We could select all of our keys and see how we're actually scaling about that pivot point.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I'm going to right-click and undo. And same thing here. You can actually scale with values, and here's the pivot point that you use.
So you have a little red line pivot that you can use, and you can scale towards or away from that. Very, very handy tool. But for now, you guys haven't been working with animation curves too much, so just take our word for the tool for what it does, and you'll see more about how to work with this a little bit later once you have a deeper understanding of curves themselves.
Yeah, but if you kind of ignore the curve right now and just look at the keys, you can kind of understand you're just changing the value of those keys.
Absolutely. You can definitely see the behavior of this tool.
You can even see the scaling feedback here in the viewport as well.
Exactly. What I mean is don't focus too much on what that's going to do to your animation right now.
Exactly.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we're really going to drive that home, so that's all good.
Okay, so next to this.
Now we could add some keys with the Add Keys tool. This is sort of like if you wanted to add a key here without having to go back, turn on Auto Key and turn on Scale Key. But again, this forces you, or this requires that you have a good understanding of how it's going to behave here in the Curve Editor. So I'm going to hit Control-Z. I can undo that move. And then here, this is kind of cool. This is sort of like a pencil that lets you draw your own curve.
Okay, I'll go ahead and demo it.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. It's like, wow, look at all those keys down here. Rewind, play.
What he's just done, and again, we'll talk more about the whys of this a little bit later, but he's drawn his own animation curve, more or less.
Which is cool, but I mean, wow, it creates so many extra keys here.
Well, you can fix that with the next button.
You can, actually.
And this
you can reduce keys.
Reduce keys, and if you just go ahead and click this, you'll get a threshold value.
Right.
This threshold controls the strength at which you will reduce excess keyframes.
Right. In the value part of your graph.
So what basically that means is, in this case, since we're using max units for position, if one keyframe is 0.5 units away from another keyframe as far as its value is concerned, that key will be removed. So if you go ahead and click OK, boom, notice a lot of those excess keys got removed. We still maintain the same general shape of our curve. Now, again, just to say, I know I'm really beating a dead horse here. Don't worry too much about what this curve is doing and how it's affecting the animation. We'll talk more about that here in just a moment.
Absolutely.
Just, again, we're trying to drive home some of the tools that are available up here in your toolbar. Let's go ahead and undo a couple times, get back to our bounce.
Yeah, I'm going to snap this up real quick.
Now, the next several buttons across the toolbar we are going to mention but not demonstrate. And there are all of these buttons that have little red lines on them.
Right.
And what these do is these control something called tangency, which right now I do not even want to approach.
Yep.
We'll talk about that in an upcoming video. In fact, the same is true of the following buttons. These are going to lock various selections, things you don't need to worry about right now. Snapping on frames, parameter out of curve range. In fact, don't worry about any of this right now. These are various functions that will pertain to how you work with animation curves, and since we're not working with animation curves right now, we're going to leave them alone.
Right. These are basically tangent things, and as we said with the tangents, we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
That's right. So let's see. Let's go up to the menu bar.
Okay.
We've kind of done this a little bit backwards because backwards because we usually start with the menu bar and work our way down.
Sure.
But that's cool. Let's take a look at modes. Modes is going to allow you to see the curve editor in one of two different ways. Right.
Basically, the curve editor is actually a type of track view, and it's sort of like a template that you overlay over this track view, and just kind of changing the way the information is presented.
There are different ways to view, to visualize your animation. You have the curve editor and the dope sheet. Go ahead and just bring up the dope sheet. We won't be focusing on the use of the dope sheet very much, so that's fine, but just to kind of show it to you, we'll probably to bring it up a little bit later in a future project, but now you've seen it. Let's go ahead and go back to the curve editor, and there we go. And next to this, we have the settings menu. Now, what are you going to find in here, just roughly?
Basically, these are different ways of controlling how your controller window is presenting your information.
Okay.
And one thing that is kind of cool that I like is this interactive update. And basically what this allows you to do is as you change a key, it allows you to see that in real-time feedback in your viewport.
Right, so as you update your animation curves, you're actually going to see a change in your viewport to reflect what you've just done
in real time without having to let up on the mouse button.
Right.
So now if I turn that off, you can see here I'm making a change, but you're not going to see it in your viewport until I let go of the mouse button and click.
Right. Now the reason you can switch this on and off is because in a heavier scene, this really could slow things down.
Exactly.
So for something this simple, it's no problem.
Sure, and it is off by default, but I just want to show you and turn that thing on. And then sync cursor time here real quick. This basically allows you to snap the time slider to the cursor when you click down on it.
Very cool.
So it's like, let's see what it looks like over here, over here, over here. And again, because this also does turn on this interactive update by default, they're actually both on at the same time. It can slow your scene down, so you just want to make sure that's turned off if you're not using it.
Now, down underneath that, we have some areas that are specifically geared toward the controller window for whether or not you're automatically expanding various parts of it as you select objects, as whether or not things are going to automatically display based on when you select objects.
And whether it's going to automatically select different controllers when you click on your viewport.
Exactly. That's cool enough. That's plenty of information. Let's go ahead and move on to display. And what is this going to show?
Well, this is actually going to show you a couple different things which can give you a little bit more information in your key window, such as selected key stats. And so now whenever you select a key, you actually get the value, or the time rather, and the value. It's sort of like time, comma, value.
Okay,
and it actually shows that for your selected keys. So it's very handy to get quick information on, basically what those keys are storing.
Right, very cool. On the other hand, like a con to it perhaps would be like if you had a lot of keyframes and you select too many of them at once, you're just going to get a jumble of numbers.
Right. It gets kind of busy. And you can actually turn that off by going down here as well.
Very nice. And we'll talk more about the status area here in just a few moments.
Sure.
So there's display. Now, what other things can we show in here? Just a few things. We don't really have to harp on every single option.
Yeah, again, we're not talking about tangents, but, just real quick, these tangents are these little, kind of like a little bow tie that's coming out of your key that allows you to adjust the behavior. You can actually turn on all tangents or just, by default, selected tangents.
Okay.
So that's what that does there. And again, you could, it's only showing the curves that you have selected. Right now it's hiding the non-selected ones, and you can turn that off if you want to see all curves, even the ones that aren't selected in your controller window.
Very nice.
And we've talked about filters already before, too.
Did we?
We briefly alluded to it. Just basically allows you to filter out the different controllers and objects that you see around here.
I actually slipped my mind.
Yeah.
All right, so next to this we have controller. Now, this is actually, this would open up a whole can of worms that I don't want to get too far into right now, but this is where you can assign new controllers, new black boxes that will handle various aspects of your animation. We will be talking about controllers a little bit later and how you can work with them over a couple of videos.
Yeah.
So right now we'll just kind of glance right on by this.
Yeah, controllers are cool.
They're awesome,
yeah.
Now here we have tracks.
And again, this might be more of, like a legacy kind of option up here,
Sure. Well, it's various ways that we can add different animation tracks. Again, not something we need to really focus on right now. Next to this, we have keys.
Yeah, now this is actually why I kind of wanted to go through our main toolbar before. This is sort of like a duplicate of the main toolbar, being able to move, slide, scale, add, and reduce
That's
keys.
right. We see a lot of the things that we've already kind of talked about. There's soft select keys, which we don't really need to focus on right now because we're not moving too many keyframes around. We can choose whether or not we're snapping keys or aligning them to the cursor. Let's move on to the curves menu, where we can apply an ease or a multiplier curve. Now, these are ways that we can edit entire selections of animation curves by applying a new curve to them.
Wow.
And that sounds really complicated.
Yeah, especially when they don't know what curves are.
That's right. So we're not even, again, it's something we're not going to bang on, just kind of want to, plant the seed, let you kind of see what that's going to do.
Yeah.
And finally, your various utilities for the track view.
Right, and like we said, the curve editor is sort of like a template that's applied to this max track view.
That's right.
Kind of, I didn't want to say doohickey, but it's kind of like a doohickey.
It is a thing.
Yes, and then you can actually get into and customize the way, the graphics are displayed and things like that.
The point is, now, again, we haven't really gone over, and there's a list of the various utilities that you can apply to some of your curves. Now, the reason we didn't really go into a lot of these is, to be honest, you can be an effective animator and you can actually do a lot of work without using a lot of these tools. Right. So we're just kind of putting them out, giving you a general idea of what you're going to be finding in here, and for the purposes of our project, we'll go ahead and move on from there. There is one last area of the curve editor I do want to mention, and that's the status area down here on the bottom. Right. Now, what are you going to find down here?
Well, this is actually really cool. This gives you an indicator of your time and your value of your selected key down here. And again, you can actually turn it on and off, so you could see it up here in the key window.
Gotcha.
And then we actually, of course, we explained our navigation tools here.
Now, you can punch in different values if you want to move a key here.
Right, exactly. So instead of having to move a key interactively, you can actually type in values and actually see, as you're moving it, you can see how those values are changing. And you can also see down here in your timeline how your curves, how your keys are changing as you're moving them.
That's right.
As you're sliding the key in time, you're actually seeing which frame it is jumping to.
Hit undo and get that back. Now, what do we have? Some of these other things over here, just real quick. All right. All right. Just we have a couple of more areas where we can kind of filter out what we have selected. You'll notice we can zoom in on particular aspects of the curve editor. We can type in like a certain filter for what it is we want to see. Sure. And we have an area down here for selection set.
Right. Yeah, kind of like a select by name kind of thing.
That's
and
right.
Making a selection
so just
set.
a couple other various aspects of the UI. Really, with that, that's everything that I wanted to discuss for the curve editor. It's just kind of a brief introduction to the user interface. As you get deeper and deeper into animation, you will be working with this a lot.
Right. I just want to point out these quick buttons up here. We're definitely not going to get into this either, but these are buttons associated with the biped object that is built into Max.
Anytime you see a little stick figure kind of guy, this has to do with a biped, and we will not be using bipeds at all in this class. Right. So just to get that out of the way right now. So that is going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.